He dropped me off at the ER with a kiss on the cheek and a whispered promise, "I'll be right back, Ma." I believed him, but he never came back. Days passed, and I lay there in that hospital bed, thinking something terrible must have happened, an accident. Maybe something that kept him from me. But when I finally made it home and checked my bank account, the truth hit me like another stroke. He hadn't vanished. He'd taken my insurance money and disappeared. The first thing I saw when I woke up was a ceiling I didn't recognize, white, cold, unfamiliar, the kind of ceiling that belongs in a place where people are monitored, not healed. A monitor was beeping steadily beside me, too loud, too close. My mouth felt like cotton. My left arm tingled and my face felt heavy, like half of it had slipped away from me. It took a minute before the fog cleared enough to realize where I was. A hospital. The memory came back in jagged pieces. I had been sitting on my porch in Savannah, sipping peppermint tea as the sun dipped below the magnolia trees. Then my right hand started shaking. My teacup slipped and shattered against the wood. My mouth wouldn't form words. My vision blurred. Somehow, I managed to dial my son, Daniel. He came quickly, or at least he said he did. His voice on the phone was calm, soothing. "I'm on my way. Ma, just hang tight." He showed up, knelt beside me, held my purse in one hand and my shoulder with the other. He told me not to worry, that I'd be okay, that he'd take care of everything, and then he was gone. That was the last time I saw him. The next morning, a nurse came in to check my vitals. I asked her, voice barely more than a croak, "Has my son been by today?" She hesitated for a split second too long before forcing a smile. "Not yet. Mrs. Harris. Maybe later." Later came and went. So did the next day, and the next. No visitors, no fresh clothes, no flowers, no Daniel. By the fourth day, I stopped asking. By the fifth, the discharge nurse looked at me with soft eyes and asked, "Do you have someone picking you up?" I lied. I told her yes. Then I signed the discharge forms with a hand that still trembled from the stroke and called myself a cab, using the $20 bill I had tucked behind my driver's license money I hadn't touched since Christmas. The cab driver didn't speak, and I was grateful. My voice still didn't feel like it belonged to me. When I got home, the porch light was out. My ferns were wilted. Mail was piled up like no one had been there in weeks. But what shook me the most was what I found inside, or more precisely, what I didn't find. And that's where this story really begins. I walked into the house with the kind of quiet that doesn't soothe, it presses down on you, settles in your chest like fog. My legs were still weak from the hospital stay, so I held the wall as I moved from room to room. Nothing had been touched. The clock in the hallway still blinked 12 ohms from the last power outage. My tea mug sat in the sink, crusted over. The mail was stacked high. The porch plants shriveled brown. There wasn't even a note from Daniel. I told myself maybe he was busy. Maybe he had meant to come by and just hadn't gotten around to it. But deep down, something already felt wrong. I sat down at the kitchen table and exhaled slowly. That table had seen everything: birthday cakes, overdue bills, report cards, the grief of losing my husband, and the joy of watching Daniel walk across his high school graduation stage. I reached for the calendar on the wall. That's when I noticed the envelope under my foot. It was from the hospital, thin, official looking. I bent down, picked it up, and flipped it over. There, in bold red letters, paid in full. My brow furrowed. Paid I hadn't even seen a bill yet, let alone paid it. I turned on my old laptop and pulled up my bank account, hoping to find a transaction, maybe something Daniel had taken care of on my behalf. I typed in my login info. Wrong password. I tried again. Still wrong. A pit formed in my stomach. I clicked reset password, but the site told me the contact email had been changed. That's when the panic hit, full force. My hands trembled as I called the bank. I was on hold for over 40 minutes, just listening to jazz music and wondering what I was about to find. Finally, a young man answered. His voice was polite, a little too cheerful. Yes, ma'am. I do see that the password and contact details were changed. 2 days ago. By who, Mr. Daniel Harris? He's listed here as an authorized user on the account. My mouth went dry. I almost dropped the phone. I managed to ask, "Can you see any recent activity?" "Yes," he said. "There have been several large withdrawals, and one moment. It looks like a transfer of $18,000. What I whispered. He repeated it. "Yes, ma'am. Transferred into an external account ending in 4887. I had never seen that number before in my life. Still shaking, I thanked him, hung up, and immediately called my insurance provider. I figured if Daniel had used my bank login, he might have poked around my other accounts too. What I didn't expect was what the representative said next. "Oh, yes, Ms. Harris. We processed your supplemental critical illness payout just last week. $18,000 was deposited into your linked account. I never filed a claim," I said. There was a pause. "Well, according to our records, the claim was submitted with your name, your ID, and your doctor's discharge summary. Everything checked out. I asked her to read me the name on the receiving account. There was a rustle of papers, then Daniel Harris. It says he's your son." I sat in stunned silence, the receiver still pressed to my ear, my body cold with disbelief. Daniel hadn't just left me in a hospital bed. He had taken the payout money from my insurance. He had logged into my bank account, changed my passwords, claimed he'd help, and instead helped himself to everything. He hadn't come by the house because he knew what I would find. That was the moment the fear left my body, replaced by something sharper, not grief, not confusion, rage. I wasn't just someone's mother anymore. I was someone's mark. He had planned it, waited until I was at my weakest speech slurred, body limp, mind fuzzy, and saw an opportunity, not to care for me, but to strip me of everything I'd spent a lifetime building. He saw my illness as a window, and he climbed right through it. I looked around my home at the walls I painted by hand, the couch I stitched up myself when money was tight, the framed family photo above the fireplace, and I felt the deepest kind of sorrow. Not because my bank was empty, but because the boy I had raised had become the kind of man who could look me in the eyes, tell me everything would be okay, and then rob me blind. But I also felt something else. Resolve. Because what Daniel didn't know, what he never thought to remember, was that I wasn't the helpless woman he thought I'd become. I had spent decades surviving, and I wasn't done yet. I sat at my kitchen table for hours that night. No lights on, no radio playing, no TV humming in the background, just me, my cooling cup of tea, and the sound of a house too quiet for what I was feeling. It wasn't the money, not really. It was what it represented. All my life, I had poured myself into that boy. Daniel had been my whole world since the moment he came into it, screaming and red-faced, with eyes so wide I swore he saw right through me. I worked double shifts to buy him his first bike, skipped doctor appointments for myself so he could have braces. I missed out on vacations, holidays, even my own retirement party, just to make sure he had what he needed. And through it all, I never asked for anything in return, not once. I just assumed, hoped. Maybe that one day he'd be there when it mattered. That when I was the one who needed help, he'd show up, not out of obligation, but out of love. But now, I realized he didn't love me in the way that mattered. He loved what I gave him, the roof, the meals, the loans, the foundation I built while going without. He loved the comfort I provided, not the woman who provided it. And somewhere along the way, he stopped seeing me as his mother. He started seeing me as an inconvenience, a burden, a line item, a bank account to manage, then empty. He didn't even have the decency to lie well. He didn't pretend to care long enough to check in after I was discharged. No. How are you feeling? Ma, no flowers, no clean socks, just silence. The kind of silence that speaks louder than any apology ever could. I looked around my kitchen, the scratches on the table from when he was in kindergarten, the notepad with my grocery list still on the counter, the old coffee mug that said, "Number 1 Mom," in faded blue paint. It was like standing inside a museum of my own effort, and suddenly it all felt hollow. I had believed that love was enough, that if you gave your child everything, time, trust, sacrifice, they'd grow into someone who would protect you when the roles reversed. But that's not how love works. Love without boundaries turns into something else. Love without accountability becomes currency, and Daniel had spent it all. It's a strange thing when your heart breaks but you don't cry. You just know. You know something inside you is done. Done hoping, done excusing, done waiting for someone to show up the way you always did. I wasn't just heartbroken. I was humiliated, because somewhere in my mother's heart, I still believed he might be good, that he'd come to his senses, that he'd knock on my door and say, "I messed up. Ma, I'm sorry." But you can't hold your breath waiting for someone who's never been afraid to leave you gasping. I got up from the table and walked toward the hall closet, the same one where I stored Christmas lights, extra blankets, and old letters I couldn't quite part with. At the very back, tucked in an envelope yellowed by time, was a card. It was from a former student, Sonia Bradley. I'd taught her in 11th grade English, sharp as a whip, full of fire. After graduating law school, she sent me a handwritten note. "Miss Harris, if you ever need me, really need me, I'll be there." I never thought I'd call on that promise. But that night, I picked up the phone and dialed. "Sonia Bradley," a voice answered on the second ring. "Blanchard Law Firm." I swallowed the lump in my throat. "Sonia, it's Miss Harris." There was a pause, then a quiet gasp. "Miss Harris, oh my God, are you okay?" "No," I said, steady as I could manage, "but it's about to be." I told her everything, every painful, humiliating detail. The fake business account, the forged insurance claim, the rerouted disability payments. She didn't interrupt. She didn't offer pity. She just listened. When I finished, there was a change in her voice, something sharp, focused, protective. "Daniel messed with the wrong woman," she said. A strange thing happened in that moment. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I breathed. For the first time since I left that hospital, I could actually breathe. Because now, I had something I hadn't had in weeks. A plan. They thought I was old. They thought I was slow. They thought I was too tired to notice what they were doing. But they forgot who taught them how to read between the lines. Now it was my turn to write the next chapter, and I wasn't coming for a conversation. I was coming for consequences. Sonia didn't waste a moment. Less than 24 hours after our call, she was on my porch in Savannah, her heels clicking against the floorboards like punctuation marks. She carried a leather briefcase and a look I recognized instantly. It was the same look I used to give Daniel when he lied about doing his homework. Calm, but not fooled. We sat at my kitchen table, the same one I had cried over the night before, and she opened her laptop. Every document, every screenshot, every detail was laid out with surgical precision. "I'm going to walk you through this, step by step," she said, and she did patiently, like the student she once was. She started with the bank account changes. Daniel had accessed my online profile using my old login, reset the password using a backup email he created in my name, and rerouted my contact info. Then came the insurance theft. He had submitted 3 separate claims under my supplemental health policy, 2 for hospitalization, 1 for post-care support, all of them processed. All of them signed Margaret Harris, in a handwriting that was almost, but not quite, mine. The money had been deposited into an account under the name Harris Wellness Consulting, a business I'd never heard of, a business that didn't exist, except on paper it did. Daniel had filed the LLC online, paid a small filing fee, and used it as a funnel to siphon my insurance benefits. $18,000, $12,000, then $6,000. "That's not just theft," Sonia said. "That's wire fraud, identity theft, and elder financial abuse." She clicked to the next page. "And this is your Social Security payment history. My monthly check, barely enough to cover my prescriptions, and food hadn't landed in my account since January. He submitted a change of address form to the SSA," Sonia said, "claimed you'd moved in with him. That's how he redirected the benefits. He forged your signature there, too. It hit me harder than I expected. That little check was my dignity, my last sliver of independence, and he'd taken that, too." I didn't speak for a long moment. Then I said, "I want justice, not pity, not a repayment plan, justice." Sonia nodded. "Then we start by locking everything down." By that afternoon, she had filed emergency freezes on all known accounts associated with Daniel or the fake business. She contacted my bank and added dual authentication. She submitted an official fraud report to my insurance company and began compiling evidence for a civil suit. She also called in a favor from a friend at the Georgia Department of Insurance, someone who specialized in elder fraud. "I'll be honest with you, Miss Harris," she said. "This could lead to a criminal investigation. If you want it to, I do. You want to press charges? Not yet." I said, "I want him to feel safe first. Let him think he got away with it." Sonia blinked, then grinned. "You've still got fire." "No," I said, "I've got a memory." And for the first time since my stroke, I felt like myself again. We spent the next week building the case. Sonia helped me change every password, review every financial statement, and set up identity theft monitoring. She even helped me contact Social Security to report the fraud and request back pay. My nerves were still raw, but my hands didn't shake anymore when I held the phone. I didn't second-guess myself when I signed the legal forms. I didn't ask if it was too much or if maybe Daniel hadn't meant it, because the truth had settled in. He did mean it, and I wasn't going to carry that for him anymore. The following Friday, I went to the grocery store near my neighborhood. It was my first real outing since I got home from the hospital. I moved slowly, leaning on the cart, feeling every muscle in my body stretch awake again. I smiled at the cashier and picked up a box of crackers and a bundle of fresh okra. Then, in the frozen food aisle, I saw him, Daniel. He was pushing a cart beside Candace, his girlfriend. They were laughing, tossing steaks and wine into the basket like nothing had ever gone wrong. Candace was talking fast, as usual, throwing things in without looking at the price. Daniel was nodding along, playing the part of a provider. My blood didn't boil. It froze. I turned down another aisle and waited until they passed. When I finished my shopping, I walked out of that store knowing one thing with complete certainty. They were about to lose everything they thought they owned. The next week, Sonia called me. "It's time," she said. "We have the full documentation. Insurance, banking, business filings, even the forged claim forms. I've filed the civil suit. We're going to demand full restitution and petition for wage garnishment. And I've notified the Georgia Elder Protection Unit." My voice didn't shake. Good. Then I said, "I have an idea." Daniel and Candace were hosting a backyard cookout that weekend. A small thing. Family, friends, a few folks from church. I wasn't invited, of course, but I showed up anyway. I wore my soft white dress and carried a lemon pie. Candace answered the door, her face stunned. "Miss Harris, hi." "We weren't expecting, I know," I said. "Just thought I'd drop by. Brought something sweet." Daniel appeared behind her, his smile faltering. "Ma, what are you doing here? I just wanted to see how my investments were doing," I said calmly. He blinked, confused, nervous. I walked past them into the yard, placed the pie on the table next to the plastic cups and ribs, then turned back to Daniel and handed him a manila envelope. He stared at it. "What's this, your future?" Inside were copies of the court filing, the fraud reports, and a printed spreadsheet of every dollar he had taken. Page after page of his betrayal, bound by the law this time, not just my memory. Candace glanced over his shoulder, reading in real time. Her face turned pale. "You told me that money was from a bonus," she whispered. Daniel didn't say a word. I looked at him once, just once, and said, "Good luck in court. Judges don't take kindly to sons who rob their mothers." Then I walked out of that backyard without another word, because some things don't need to be shouted. They just need to be served cold. It was quiet for 2 days after the cookout. No calls, no texts, no cryptic Facebook posts from Daniel trying to explain away what had just happened. And that silence, oh, it wasn't respectful. It was fearful. I knew him too well. He was sitting at home, hands on his head, staring at that stack of papers, trying to make sense of it all, trying to figure out how the woman he left in a hospital bed, barely able to speak, had turned around and caught him cold. But I wasn't surprised, because I had raised Daniel. I knew how he danced when the music was playing, and I knew how he panicked when the song stopped. The hearing was scheduled for 3 weeks later. Sonia called every few days to keep me updated, but there wasn't much to say. We had everything we needed, notarized statements from the bank, the business filing Daniel made under my name, screenshots of the insurance claims, and a record of every dollar rerouted from my Social Security. He didn't just dip his hand into my accounts. He moved in, set up camp, and drank me dry. And the law was ready to respond. The night before the hearing, I stood in front of the mirror in my bedroom. I hadn't been in a courtroom in years, certainly not as the one bringing a case. I pulled out my navy blue slacks and a soft pink blouse. It was the same blouse I'd worn to Daniel's graduation. I wore it then with pride. Now I wore it with resolve. When I looked at myself, I hardly recognized the woman staring back, not because of the wrinkles or the gray at my temples. No, because for the first time in a long time, she looked like someone who believed in herself again. Sonia picked me up the next morning in a sleek black sedan she borrowed from her firm. Her hair was tied back, glasses perched on her nose, file folder in her lap. "You ready?" she asked quietly. I didn't answer with words. I just nodded once. The courthouse wasn't glamorous, just a squat, beige building with a flag that needed replacing, and tired eyes walking in and out with too many burdens to carry. But that courtroom room 204 might as well have been a cathedral, because truth was about to be spoken there. My truth. Daniel was already seated inside when we arrived. Third bench from the front, alone, no attorney, just a wrinkled suit and a face that looked like it hadn't slept in days. He didn't see me come in. I sat behind him, let him stew, let him feel it, the weight of silence, the judgment of the law, the presence of a mother who no longer blinked at his excuses. When the judge entered, we all rose. Then came the reading of the case. His voice was steady, unmoved. Mr. Daniel Harris, you are here today to respond to a civil complaint filed by Ms. Margaret Harris. The charges include identity theft, financial fraud, elder exploitation, and misappropriation of government benefits. Do you understand these charges? Daniel stood slowly. Yes, Your Honor, he muttered. Sonia rose next and presented our case clean, precise, with the kind of calm that makes the truth feel undeniable. She handed over documentation, the fraudulent LLC filing, insurance claim records, the altered bank access logs, the Social Security change of address form. She didn't raise her voice once. She didn't have to. The paper spoke loudly enough. Then it was my turn. I stood slowly. My knees still ached, but my spine held. Your Honor, I said, my son left me in a hospital bed, unsure if I would ever walk again. And while I lay there, wondering if anyone would come for me, he was filing claims in my name and draining every account I had worked a lifetime to build. I paused. He didn't make a mistake. He made a choice to abandon me and a choice to steal. The judge nodded. Thank you. Ms. Harris, you may sit. Then he turned to Daniel. Do you have anything you wish to say before I rule? Daniel stood up, swallowing hard. I didn't mean to hurt her. I thought she'd be okay. I thought I could fix it before she found out. I didn't think she'd actually press charges. The judge raised an eyebrow. So your defense is that you expected your mother to stay silent? No, I panicked. I needed help. The judge closed the folder in front of him. You didn't ask for help. You stole. You forged her name. You used her identity. You siphoned money from your own mother while she was recovering from a stroke. That is not desperation. That is premeditation. He picked up his pen. In the matter of Harris versus Harris, I find the defendant liable for all claims. Full restitution of $43,800 is to be paid to the plaintiff. This will be enforced through wage garnishment, effective immediately. All associated fraudulent accounts will be frozen. And if the defendant defaults or attempts to obstruct repayment, this court will recommend criminal charges under state elder abuse and fraud statutes. I exhaled. It didn't feel like victory. It felt like vindication. Daniel turned around in his seat as I gathered my papers. His face was pale, his lips parted. Ma, he said, his voice cracking. I'm sorry. I really messed up. I looked at him. You didn't mess up. I said, you made a series of choices, one after another, and now I'm choosing myself. He opened his mouth again, but I didn't give him the chance. I walked out of that courtroom with my head held high. Sonia beside me, the sky outside wide and blue. That afternoon, I sat on my porch with a blanket over my knees and a glass of sweet tea in my hand. The cicadas were humming, the breeze light on my face. My house looked the same, but I no longer felt like a prisoner in it. The weight had lifted, not because Daniel was punished, but because I had finally stood up for myself. And that kind of justice, it doesn't fade, it frees you. The first restitution check arrived the following Friday. It came by certified mail, tucked neatly inside a plain white envelope. I held it in my hands for a long time before opening it, not because I was surprised it had been court-ordered, after all, but because of what it represented. It wasn't just a check for $438.72. It was proof that I wasn't invisible anymore. For months, I had lived under the crushing weight of betrayal. I had second-guessed myself, questioned my worth, replayed every moment of motherhood, wondering where I'd gone wrong. But that check, that simple, printed piece of paper, was the beginning of a reckoning. I didn't cash it right away. Instead, I set it on the table, right beside my Bible, and made myself a cup of tea. I sat in the kitchen where Daniel once sat coloring, his little legs swinging beneath the table. I remembered tying his shoes there, wiping his tears when he scraped his knee, teaching him how to multiply by fours, and I thought how strange that the same hands that once held his head when he had a fever were now holding a check signed by a court to compensate for the damage he'd done. Healing, I've come to learn, isn't always a flood. Sometimes it's a quiet drip, a slow return, and that day, a piece of me came back. Sonia came by that afternoon to go over next steps. The insurance company had processed their fraud findings and had approved a reimbursement of the full $36,000 payout Daniel had stolen. Restitution from the Social Security office would take longer, but it was in motion. My accounts were secure. The fake LLC had been dissolved by court order. Every door Daniel had opened with my name had now been slammed shut. But what came next? That was the real question. You could move, Sonia suggested. Start fresh somewhere. I shook my head. No, I don't want to leave. This is my home. She smiled. Then let's make it yours again. So we did. We used a portion of the returned funds to repair the leaky roof I'd been patching with duct tape for 5 years. We installed new carpet in the living room, soft and cream-colored, like the one I'd always dreamed of. I had the heater replaced before the cold set in, and even bought myself something I'd never dared to before, a motorized recliner chair, deep blue, plush as heaven. But those were just the surface changes. Inside, something else had shifted. I was no longer walking with my head down. I wasn't whispering my pain into the corners of the room. I stood taller. I answered the phone with clarity. I cooked again, not because I had to, but because I wanted to. I started baking cornbread just for myself and playing old Sam Cooke records while I folded laundry. And then, one evening while sipping tea on the porch, I had an idea. It started as a whisper in my chest and bloomed into something bigger. What if I could take what happened to me and make it matter? What if I could build something? Not for Daniel, not to punish him, but for the women like me, the ones who had no one, no Sonia, no voice, that night. I pulled out a notebook and wrote across the top in bold block letters, the Evelyn Harris Emergency Fund, a small private fund to help elderly women recover from financial abuse, especially when it came from their own families. I wasn't interested in starting a charity with gala dinners and board meetings. I just wanted a resource, a bridge for women who were drowning. The next morning, I called Sonia. I want to make something real. I said, You already did. She said, But I'll help. We opened a dedicated account. I pledged the first $10,000 from my reimbursement. Sonia matched it with $5,000 of her own. We wrote up guidelines, hired a local CPA to manage the paperwork, and met with the director at the senior center to establish referral pathways. 3 weeks later, the fund quietly opened its doors. Our first recipient was Miss Gloria, a 74-year-old woman whose grandson had used her debit card to buy a gaming console and overdrafted her account. The second was Miss Irene, who'd been loaning her son money for months until she realized he'd forged her checks. We didn't save them. We helped them save themselves. And with every woman we reached, a little more of my pain transformed into something else purpose. Daniel didn't call again, but Candace did. She left me a voice message late one night. I didn't know what he was doing, she said, her voice trembling. I didn't know until it was too late. I'm sorry you got dragged into it. If I'd known, I would have spoken up. She didn't ask for forgiveness, and I respected that. A few days later, I saw Daniel at the pharmacy. He didn't see me at first. He was hunched over near the cough drops, dressed in a cheap shirt and worn-out shoes. His shoulders slumped like a man trying to hold up a weight he didn't know he had strapped to him until the law made him carry it. He turned and saw me. Our eyes met. He opened his mouth. I shook my head once, gently. He shut his mouth, nodded slightly, and turned away. And I walked out feeling lighter than I had in years, because I didn't need his apology. I had my peace. We hosted a quiet luncheon at the church basement to mark the first month of the fund. Nothing grand, just sandwiches, deviled eggs, lemonade, and a sheet cake that read, "Still here, still rising." 3 women hugged me afterward, all of them whispering, "Thank you," in my ear like I'd rescued them. But I hadn't. I just decided not to stay quiet. That night, I sat on my porch with my old Bible and that first restitution check in hand. I had laminated it not because of its value, but because of what it symbolized. I had been silenced. I had been robbed. I had been underestimated. And I had come back stronger, because that's what women like me do. We rise, we rebuild, and we remember. The first time I truly felt free wasn't in the courtroom. It wasn't even when I received the restitution check. It was a few weeks later, on a quiet morning, when I opened the mailbox and saw nothing. No unexpected letters, no bank alerts, no bills marked urgent, just stillness, peaceful, grounded stillness. And for the first time in over a year, I didn't feel afraid of what might come next, because I knew I'd already faced the worst of it. I'd faced betrayal not from a stranger, but from my own son. I'd survived the kind of pain that cracks something in you so deep. You wonder if it will ever be whole again. But here I was standing, breathing, still moving forward. That afternoon, I sat in the little community room at the senior center with 3 women I now considered sisters in this strange, unspoken club women who'd been betrayed, manipulated, stolen from by the very people they once held as babies. Miss Gloria, Miss Irene, Miss Loretta, all of us had scars, but we also had something stronger clarity. We weren't naive anymore. We weren't ashamed either. We were builders. That day, we didn't cry. We didn't linger in pity. We made plans. Sonia helped us draft a basic workbook for spotting red flags in bank accounts and digital fraud. We talked about creating a small grant program to help pay for legal consultations for older women. One of the ladies, Miss Loretta, offered to host a monthly tea gathering for any woman who needed support, but wasn't ready to talk in front of strangers. The Evelyn Harris Emergency Fund had become more than a quiet response to pain. It had become a promise that no woman would be left behind in the silence of financial abuse, that no one would have to fight alone the way I nearly had. One day, about 2 months after the court hearing, I received another letter. This time, It wasn't from the bank or insurance company. It had no return address, but I knew the handwriting right away. Daniel. The envelope was plain, but the paper inside was folded so neatly I could tell he'd handled it several times before sending it. Ma, I got a job, warehouse work. It's hard on my back, but I'm showing up every day. First time I've done that in years. I know I don't deserve forgiveness. I know I won't ever make it right, but I just wanted you to know. I'm paying what I owe. I'm not asking you to talk to me. I just want you to know I see what I did. I see it now. Daniel, I folded the letter and placed it in the same drawer where I kept the court ruling and the laminated first restitution check. Not because I needed it, not because it changed anything, but because it reminded me how far I'd come, that I had chosen not to retaliate with rage. I had responded with resilience, and that was enough. A few weeks later, Sonia invited me to speak at a small legal luncheon for nonprofit professionals. I told her no at first. I wasn't a public speaker. I wasn't looking for attention. But then she said, "They need to hear your voice. Evelyn, not your pain, your power." So I said yes. That morning, I wore my pearl earrings, the ones I'd nearly sold the year Daniel defaulted on his first rent payment. I wore my Sunday dress, too, and brought a printed copy of the original fund proposal. When it was my turn to speak, I walked to the podium slowly, with purpose. I looked out at the room, most of them younger than me, many with notepads and pens in hand, and I said this: we talk a lot about elder care in this country, but we don't talk about elder betrayal. We prepare for loneliness, for illness, even for grief, but no one prepares you for the day your own child sees you not as a mother, but as a way to get ahead. I loved my son. I still do, in a way that only a mother can. But when he left me in that hospital bed, when he drained my savings and redirected my checks, he made a choice, and I had to make one too. I chose to speak up. I chose not to stay quiet, and in doing so, I found my voice again. Now I'm using it to help other women find theirs. The room was still for a moment. Then, slowly, they began to clap. Not the polite kind, the real kind, the kind that tells you what you said mattered. Afterward, a woman approached me, mid-50s, soft eyes, nervous hands. She whispered, "My brother's been helping with my mother's finances. We just found out he's been writing checks to himself. I didn't know what to do, but now I think I do." I touched her hand gently and said, "It's never too late to stand up. You're not alone." That night, I stood on my porch again, as I had so many nights before. The stars were out, the breeze was light, and I thought about everything that had happened from that hospital bed to that courtroom to that clap in a room full of strangers, and I realized this wasn't a story about loss. It was a story about becoming, about rediscovering strength in the ruins of betrayal, about turning what was meant to break you into something that builds others. Daniel had taken something from me. That's true. But what he didn't expect, what he never understood, was that I would take it back, not in anger, but in purpose. He will spend the next 10 years paying it back, dollar by dollar, but I'll spend the next 10 years turning those dollars into freedom for women who thought no one saw them, no one believed them, no one would fight for them. I believe, I see them. I am them. Sometimes, the deepest betrayals don't come from enemies. They come from the people you tucked in at night, prayed for, and defended. But healing begins the moment you decide you are still worth protecting, even if no one else does it for you. Speak up. Take your power back, and don't ever believe the lie that it's too late. If this story resonated with you, share your thoughts in the comments. Have you or someone you know experienced something similar? Your story might help someone else find their strength. And if you haven't already, subscribe, because every story we tell here is one more light in the dark, and someone out there needs to hear yours next.